Well, I thank you for participating in the last two podcasts, and I thank you for continuing on this journey. So, I would like to take a moment saying I know I had first said that I would be publishing a podcast Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. However, I'm going to have to scale that back to Thursday, Friday. Not because I don't have the time; it's just the way how my thing's set up. Uh, I only have so much memory, so on and so forth. So, in saying that, um, I also thank you for participating in this wonderful experience of podcasting and my testament in the journey to becoming a recovered addict. Um, I hope that whether you be on whatever side of the fence, you can appreciate how one can better support an addict. Now, in saying all of this, the last podcast we focused on the ages from I think it was 8 to 18 or something like that, and I was on my way to Alberta with my family. So, you know, the life of an addict is many different things, and I hope that what we can concentrate here on is the the emotions and the feelings. I mean, the situation really doesn't matter. What really matters is the feelings that we were feeling at the time that we were feeling them. That's really what counts here. So, as I said, we were on our way to Alberta. We had the U-Haul packed. It's kind of the story of the grapes of wrath. That's really what it is. And so here we were, loaded up to the gills with a trailing car behind the U-Haul that said Mom's Addict and fucking killing us in gas. My mom was pregnant, and we're headed out west to the land of milk and honey. On our way through Ontario, we were basically saying goodbye to anybody and everybody that we knew, and they were giving us wishful hope that we would become prosperous in that land, Alberta. Well, when we got here, the reality was we were broke. There was no money. Because minimum wage was so low in Alberta, people didn't pay a whole hell of a lot of money. And that's just what it was here. I mean, it wasn't like it was cheaper to live here. It was just as expensive as anywhere else. The problem was you just didn't make as much money unless you were willing to go and live out of town on an oil rig doing what oil rig people do, or go and live up in Fort McMurray in a camp and live on a rotation cycle of 14 days at work and then 4 days at home, 14 days at work and then 4 days at home. I mean, basically that schedule is Monday and Friday. It's Friday when you go home, and it's Monday when you go back to work. That's basically, and Monday is all the way through 14 days. That's basically what it was. So when we came to Alberta, like I said, my mom was pregnant, and her husband was here, and so was my mom, and we were trying to make a go of it. One of the first jobs I ever had in Alberta was working at this gas station pumping gas. That was my first full-time job, really. And it was a bitch to get it because I had no real experience. I mean, the only experience I really had was washing dishes and selling drugs. Those were the two job experiences I ever had in my life. And so when it came down to getting that job at the gas station, I mean, it was the best job ever because they gave me store credit and I had cigarettes. Up to that point, I didn't even have cigarettes. I mean, we didn't even have food to fucking eat. That's really where we were at. My mom was pregnant. This was a very serious situation at that time. I mean, not eating is a serious situation. And the way how the social system is set up in Alberta, I mean, they're not really there to give you any help. They're there to give you bare minimum bones because their excuse is always, well, guess what? You live in the land of milk and honey. Go get a fucking job. Go get one. Do you need some work boots? What do you need? That's basically the attitude of the social system in Alberta. That's just what it is. There is no help. It's pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get her done, son. That's what it is here. And that was a very tough realization of how Texas, Alberta really is. It was mind-blowing for people coming from the Liberal North, or NDP North of Northern Ontario. You know, like I said, it was a real story of Grapes of Wrath. You know, there are some serious struggles, and being the alcoholic addict I was, I mean, I just thought I could bulldoze through everything. And so here I was at that gas station making some money, but not really enough money. It was summertime by this point, and my thoughts was that I would be going into school that fall. And so what I decided was that I would get a job that paid a little bit more money. So my mom's husband got a job doing some serious physical labor building mats for the oil rigs. And it was good money. I mean, it was the best money I ever made at that time. And so I got a job there too, because it was no experience needed. And let me tell you, boy, I dropped a lot of weight at that job. And I also turned into this furious, angry fucking man. I mean, shit, if you weren't doing it the way that I thought it ought to be done, man, I just fucking lost my mind. I was two cunt hairs away from fucking ripping your face off all the time if you weren't doing it my way. And my way, of course, as you know, was the best way at that time. There was no other way than my way. That's how I lived my life. So here I was at this job, and I remember telling my mom, or asking my mom while I was working there and paying rent. I was definitely 100% paying rent to my mom and helping out with the bills. I would basically say to my mom, okay, well, so how is this going to work when I go to school? And my mom looked at me, and as pregnant as she was, and she said, what do you mean, school? We can't afford for you to go to school. You have to keep on working. We need all the help that we can get. In that moment, my mom fell from the pedestal that I had her on. You know, I could deal with the fact that she was dating other men. I could deal with the fact that she was pregnant. I could deal with the fact that, you know, my mom was my mom. But when she told me I couldn't go to school, and for how important education was to my mom, that blew my mind away. It hurt me so much. That cut was so deep. I actually felt abandoned in that moment. I realized that I was only a byproduct. That's what I felt like. My dad pushed me aside. There's a story of when I was a kid. I was in a elementary school, and my dad came to pick up his two sons from the marriage that he was in after my mom. And I walked up to him and I said, hey, you're my dad. And he looked at me and said, no, I'm not. I don't know who you are. And in that moment, when my mom said to me, sorry, Justin, you're not going to school. Well, what had happened to me in that moment was I realized that my future was just pissed away. That's what it felt like. And my mom wasn't going to help me anymore. That was all gone. That was all gone. And it's time to grow the fuck up. I was 18. You know, I mean, granted, when I look back at it, I showed my mom time and time again that my motivation when it came down to school was not really there. You know, my motivation of getting an education wasn't there either. I didn't really strive hard in school. I mean, I did when I was in the demonstration school, but I never really did it in high school. I was always blowing it off, pissing it away, selling drugs, doing whatever the fuck I had to do in order to really not have to participate as much as I possibly had to in high school. I mean, I was always the guy trying to do bare minimum. But when I did do something in high school, I mean, I tried to do it the best that I could possibly do it. I always tried to put my best foot forward. Hence why I was such a great fucking drug addict. And I loved drugs. I love drugs. I still love them. I love booze. Still love it. That's the fucking problem. So like I said, back to that moment when I realized that my life was completely over, me and her husband, my mom's husband, went down to this job, and he got pissed off for whatever reason and fucking quit. And when he quit, I mean, I had no vehicle, I had no license, I had no way of getting to that job. It was 45 minutes out of the town that we lived in, and there was no bus service. If there was bus service, I assure you I would have went there. It was the best fucking money I ever made in my life. You know, it was good money. And already at that moment I was selling myself as a whore for money. You know, I could keep booze. I could binge drink on those weekends that I got paid, which was like my $70 holiday, and then I could maintain myself with marijuana or pot for the next 2 weeks. I mean, I was itching and jonesing for heroin at that time. Don't get me wrong. I mean, marijuana is great, but you know what it's not? It's not that warm blanket that you feel when you spike a fucking needle in your arm and you let that white china just flow through you. That's God, man. Believe you me. It's like trying to come, but you don't really need to because you feel so good. It's the most fucked up feeling in the world when you're using opiates and heroin. So here I was, jobless and codependent addict that I am. I thought that I would help my mom's husband as well, and we would get a job together. I mean, really the reason why I was doing it was because I just needed him to get me to a job that could pay me well. You know, that's what I needed. I needed him to get me to the factory because in the town that we were in, there was really no bus service to those places. That's the reason why I needed him. You know, I had no respect for him. At this point, my little brother was born, and I witnessed his father smoking crack. You know, at that moment, I drew the line in the sand, and I thought to myself, I'll never be him. You know, my mom gave me all these stories about how much of a drug addict my dad was, and how much of an alcoholic he was, and how he used to beat her up, and all this stuff, and emotionally abuse her, and everything else. But there I was, watching the father of my little brother smoking crack. And I was also watching him sacrifice the money for a six-pack rather than milk for my little brother. That's what I saw. I mean, definition of a loser was fucking it in front of me. Yet, he was the benchmark of what I never wanted to be in my life. My father and that guy, my brother's father, I never wanted to be those people. And those were the role models that would tell me, do not aspire to be like them. Because if you do, you're going to realize that you're a loser. Wow, shit for beans. I didn't realize I was going down that path until it was all too late. I mean, I was already down that path. I was already getting drunk. I was already using. I was just maintaining. I mean, the fact that I could say to him, you're an alcoholic, but I'm not. For fuck's sakes, I'm an alcoholic. I was an alcoholic in that moment. I was drinking till I was blackout. That's an alcoholic. That's not normal consumption of alcohol. Normal people who consume alcohol have 2 or 3 beers and then they go to bed because it's just too much for them. To me, it was like, why not finish it? Like, why not? I could have 2 or 3, but why the fuck would you? Right? That was my thinking in addiction. Sure, I could smoke a joint, but why would you? There's a whole bag there. You know? There's a whole bag there. Get to it. And so it was always a perpetuation of that. And you know, the line in the sand for me was, I may want heroin, but at least I'm not smoking crack like a crackhead. You know, I mean, there's my brother's father running around stealing meat in order to suffice his addiction. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Go get a job, you know? And he would work these shitty places here and there for $10, $12 an hour, and he's a grown man. And he wouldn't last longer than 2 or 3 weeks, and then he'd quit the job. And I mean, fuck, he's everything that my mom told me my dad was. And I wasn't going to school in order to help support this fucking douchebag? That's where my thinking was in that moment. So, all of a sudden, he got a good job in Fort McMurray working on a project called Firebag. Firebag was a massive project, and a lot of men went up there and broke their backs in those holes. And at that same time, just prior to that, I was working for a plumbing company where I really shit the bed. And I mean, the reason why I shit the bed at that time was because of this. Everything came to a head. Everything came to a head in my life where I realized, one, I wasn't going to school. Secondly, I had to help my mom through this life situation. Woe is me, mea culpa. My life fucking sucks. That's where I was at in that moment. I mean, I could have learned a trade, but my dyslexia fucks me up in the way that when I have to spin wrenches, I don't know which way is right and which way is left, especially when I'm nervous. And I was always nervous at that job. I mean, I would build things up in my life that were huge. You know, I made mountains out of molehills all of the time. And if I had just relaxed, I probably would have did not a bad job as a plumber. I mean, I ended up not showing up to work for a long time because I told them one of my girlfriends committed suicide, which was a complete lie. In reality, what was happening was I was digging myself into the hole of depression and self-defeat and into a place that I just thought I was even more worthless. You know, my life was over. I'm going to be working hard for the rest of my life. That's what I thought. And so what I came to was things have to change. You know, this shit's got to change. But it never really did. Instead, I just sat in a place where I kept drinking and using until finally this plumbing company said, hey, guess what? You just can't be here anymore. That was my first experience of ever being fired. Then from there, I went on to working in some lumber yard. That didn't last long, I think a couple months. And then from there, I went to working for my friend's dad who owned a masonry company. And you know what I realized when I was doing masonry was life is not all about money, because this is really hard work and this is not something I want to do for the rest of my life. I realized that then and there. And then I got a job working for a construction company at the same time that my mom's husband got a job working up in Fort McMurray. So my construction job was just as a general laborer for some condominium development. My thought, though, was that this was a job for life. However, truth be told about the construction industry is it's project from project, not you work for this company and they're going to give you a bunch of projects. It's not really how it works. Well, not in Alberta at that time anyways. So there I was watching some asshole in a hole telling a guy who was digging the hole, a hole operator, you need to dig out more than 5 centimeters. And he'd hop out of the hole and this operator would dig, scrape the bottom of the hole. And I realized in that moment that I didn't want to be the guy digging the hole. I wanted to be the guy telling the guy to dig the hole, because, that's my fucking ego, right? I thought I was the best at everything. Truth be told, the reason why I left a lot of these jobs was because I was drunk all the time. Or I would show up hungover and I was unable to do the work. I was unable to do the job. That's just what it was, And this was a perpetuation already. I didn't realize that I was living like my brother's father already. but I really was. I was already in the cycle. I was already my own dad, who was the biggest thing I never wanted to be in my life. I mean, when I was a kid, the thing that I would always say to myself is, I don't ever want to be like my dad. I mean, I discussed in that first podcast about what my dad was and the stories I had heard about him, and they used to call him asshole and all this stuff, and so I didn't want to be that guy anymore. That's not what I wanted to be. I didn't want to be that. But I already was. I was already there. So I thought I had a pretty good career, and then all of a sudden the project was over and I got laid off. And after I got laid off, my brother's father, Brian, got laid off as well. And when he came back, what ended up happening was he had met this surveyor, and lo and behold, I never realized what that guy was doing in the hole with the rod, but I guess now that I know, he was a surveyor. And so this, I called this guy on a whim to see if I could get a job with him. And so, he said a couple things to me on the phone, but I think really the real reason why I landed the job was because I could smoke as much dope as him and I could drink as much as he could. And he got me a job working as a survey assistant on a pipeline, which isn't really survey work, really. I mean, really what that project was about was being a GIS guy, general information systems guy. So we would basically map out where the welds were in the pipeline, and we would keep track of which pipe is with what pipe and so on and so forth. Then basically so that if the pipe blows up in the ground, they know who did what and what was joined to what and who made what and all that shit. The who, whys, whens, wheres, and hows of that pipeline. So in that moment, I mean, that was a fantastic job for me because we drank every night to passing out on the table and smoked dope all day long in order to scathe off our hangover. And it was all open. I mean, fuck, nobody gave a shit about anything. I mean, they were just glad that you were there. I mean, that's how much work Alberta had at the time. They didn't give a fuck what kind of person you were. All they cared about was that you were there. You were capable hands. That's what it was in the oil field. And so from that time on, I mean, I loved the job. My expectations, or I was told that I would only be out in Fox Creek for 2 weeks with this guy who hired me. But I ended up lasting about 35 days, I think, in my first stint. And this was the pattern that was about to develop. I didn't call my mom for at least 3 weeks because I was actively using. I mean, I was drunk. I was either drinking or I was smoking dope. That's or trying to do things on the pipeline. And so my mom got really upset, and she basically called every fucking hotel in that town of Fox Creek looking for me like a crazy girlfriend. But it's my mom. I remember having to call my mom and thinking to myself, fuck, really? I got to call her. I could be in the bar right now. And this was the pattern all the time. When I was drinking and using, I just didn't talk to my mom. That's just not what happened. I would just, stop all conversation with her. And so when I was in Fox Creek and this was going on, I didn't see a problem with my consumption or drinking or using because everybody around me was doing the same exact thing that I was doing. And this was fantastic. Finally, the job was done and I was sent home. When I came home, I mean, I had a shit ton of money. And we finally felt successful. So we as a family felt successful because we had oil field money coming in. And it felt as if we had made it. I mean, Brian wasn't really doing anything. My brother's father. I mean, he was still a fucking loser. He could work at a place 2 or 3 weeks and then unable to show up. The reality of the situation was he was not happy being in Alberta, and neither was my mom. I mean, we had made a commitment that we would stay here for at least 5 years. But that wasn't going to happen. I mean, that was perceived right then and there. And that's just what it was. They weren't happy here. They didn't like the way the social structure was in Alberta. They fucking hated it. So now where I'm going to venture into is my brother's father. His father died, and they had no way of getting home. There was no money. Brian didn't have enough money to get them home. So I basically donated my entire paycheck, taking inventory, of course, putting that shit in my back pocket as an ace, and sent them home. And I went back with them. And basically this was like almost a homecoming in Northern Ontario, saying, hey, look at us. We made it. We made it. We made it to this place where Alberta money is making us money. Alberta money is what's funneling our addictions, and life is great. So there we were with this ego, basically trying to tell people how great life was in Alberta, and I think people could see through it. So this had happened right around Christmas time, and my little brother was born. Like, this was his first Christmas. And so I ended up leaving the day before Christmas Eve and coming home for a job, basically, to go back into, the next project. But really at this time, I didn't know any of the skills that were necessary in order to be a surveyor. I mean, alls I really knew was how to do GIS on a pipeline. That's not really what surveyors do in the bush. So I came back and there was no real work. I mean, I lied and told my parents, like my mom, that there was work, but there really wasn't. And I just didn't want them to think that, oh, he went back because he doesn't like us. But that was the reality. I just didn't want to be around his family. I mean, my brother's father's brother would choke me out and physically become violent with me. And it was just a messed up situation. Not something I really wanted to be a part of. And that's really why I came back early, or left there early. And time went on, plus there was dogs and, a whole bunch of bullshit that somebody had to take care of here in Alberta. Somebody had to take care of those things, and I elected myself to do that. So like I said, I came back, and they came back afterwards, and things really didn't change. I ended up getting another job with that survey firm, but I ended up getting sent home because I didn't really know what the fuck I was doing, and nobody had taught me. So I got sent home, and that was kind of a blow to my ego, because I thought, well, shit, this can't be that hard, even as an assistant. But I just couldn't. I don't know what it was. I do know what it was. My anxiety stopped me from many, many things. And one of the things that it had stopped me from was doing well in work. I couldn't listen to what they were saying. I couldn't focus and concentrate because I was so nervous. I had so much anxiety about what was going on. And so that definitely hindered me. It was a handicap that I had. It wasn't even a hindrance. It was a handicap. And so when I got sent home, I mean, there were my mom was there, my little brother was there, and Brian was there. And then I ended up getting another job. Like, the firm was basically going to throw me one more bone to see if, maybe this guy will work out, maybe he won't work out. And so I went down to southern Alberta for a job with no bush. And the guy I was working with, we got into a fist fight, basically. And I was sent home then. So I came home and I got laid off. And that's basically how they did this. Oh, well, you know what? We're running out of work. We're going to lay you off. And so I thought to myself, what the hell? I like doing what I'm doing. I just, kind of understood it at this point, but didn't really know. And, I was getting drunk every night. That's why the crew chiefs hated me, was because I fucking just reeked of booze all the time. So I think it was about 2 or 3 months past, and I got a job at a really good firm. One of the best oil field surveying firms I've ever had the pleasure to work for. However, I'm an alcoholic and a drug addict. So they alluded to having to maybe potentially give me a drug test, but it never really happened. I mean, and my drinking was my drinking. So I started off with this firm, and I went out with a guy again to another town, and as long as I could keep my drinking away from them, we were going to be okay. And in this firm, what they used to do was they would give us separate rooms, which is great for me. I mean, that was awesome. I loved that. I love the fact that I didn't have to be with some asshole in the day and some asshole at night. I mean, I loved the way that this company was really set up. And it also allowed me to drink and use the way that I wanted to drink and use without other people knowing, because they weren't around me at night. They didn't say, holy fuck, this guy drinks, a 26 or a 40 every night, and he smokes a hell of a lot of weed. Look at how much weed he smokes. I was already to a place where I was starting to isolate. I would expose my addiction to those that I thought would kind of respect it in the context that it was masculine, because that's where my masculinity had stemmed from, was look at how much I can do and still get things accomplished. I'm not like my brother's father. I'm not like my father. I'm not a fucking loser. So this was always on the forefront of my mind, that I wasn't going to be like them, that I was going to be somebody who was accomplished and still able to hold their masculinity in how much they could drink, how much they could use, how much they can do what they do. This is what I always thought I was capable of doing, being able to hold it together, so to say. Because my mom always told me, if you can't hold it together, you're an alcoholic. Really, what I now perceive it as is, if you can't hold it together, it's because you're a drunk. Alcoholics go to meetings, and we're sober. Drunks drink. Anyway, from that time on, with this great new company, like I said, I went out to the first job, and it was a fantastic experience. I went out to a second job with him, and that was another fantastic experience. I worked with this guy for quite some time, and I think a lot of the reason why that worked out was because he didn't know how much I was drinking and using, really, Now, there was an experience that happened here, but I'm going to talk about that later on in the next podcast, because I didn't even know that it had happened. I mean, at this point, I was only drinking to black out. And when I was drinking to black out, I didn't remember anything. I didn't remember anything that had happened. I mean, I did later on, maybe a week or two, but one of the experiences with this guy didn't come to me until years later. I had totally blacked out about this experience that had happened when I was working with this guy in one of these jobs. So anyways, I came back home to where my mom lived, and I got so drunk that my mom ended up kicking me out. We got into a very, very violent verbal altercation, and my mom said, you got to get the fuck out of here. And I moved into what I like to call or refer to as my Alberta mom's house. Like I said, many moms wanted to adopt me because I was a good kid. I just drank too much. I mean, I could always justify it, and I could always make it look like I was the happy-go-lucky drunk, and to an effect I was, but nobody really knew that when I went to bed, it's because I was blacking out. I didn't remember any of it. And so, and I was getting high with her kids. You know, I was probably the influencer in those kids' lives where, hey man, smoke some dope. Hey man, drink some booze. You know, I mean, I needed other people around me to be as fucked up as I was. But, you know, that line in the sand was there that I would never be like my dad or like my brother's father. One of my first experiences doing drugs as well, it just kind of came back to me, was when I was 2 years old. My dad put down a line of beans on the coffee table, and I took a line of amphetamine. 2 years old is when those synapses started cracking off and kicking in my head. You know, at this time in my life, between the ages of 18 and 28, I wasn't using heavy drugs anymore. I was just maintaining with booze and marijuana and, you know, the occasional shrooms or mushrooms or something along those lines. And inherently, these are not bad substances for people. I mean, cocaine is even a great drug for some people. The problem is for me is it's poison. I crossed a line, and that line I crossed, I didn't even know that I had crossed it, because basically it happened at such a young age. I didn't know what was happening. But my alcoholism and drug addiction, my addictive behavior definitely took off. You know, it just happened. It just happened. So as this was all going on, in my adolescent period of life, my mom, like I said that they were going to be moving back to Northern Ontario after she kicked me out of the house. And this was right around my birthday, you know? And it was like, fuck it. And I remember when my mom was pulling away, I felt the abandonment that my mom felt. I mean, I felt abandoned when my mom told me you can't go to school anymore. And basically, to me, it felt like a fucking death sentence, like your life is over. But when she was pulling away, going back to Northern Ontario, and I wasn't going with them, she felt abandoned. My mom later told me later on in life that she cried for days, because I think she felt like she had abandoned me. But really, I was all grown up. You know, I was ready to take on life. I had a good job. You know, things were going to be okay. And it was party time, boy, let me tell you. I would go out there and I would make anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000 every 2 weeks, come back into the city and just fucking blow $16,000 because I had been gone for a month. And I didn't have to pay shit to my mom. Instead, I was paying my Alberta mom some rent here and there, and, you know, so on and so forth. I remember at one time my Alberta mom sat me down. She was drunk. She was an alcoholic. I mean, that's not for me to determine, but I mean, she definitely had alcoholic tendencies. She drank like I did, and she used like me. Maybe she wasn't as bad off as I was. I mean, that's her own determination. That's not for me to say. But she definitely had the same tendencies in alcoholism that I did. But I remember this one time she sat me down and she said to me, she said, Justin, if you want to go back to school, I'll help you. That meant the world to me. And I thought to myself, no, it's okay. You know, this job isn't too bad. I worked like a motherfucker, believe me. Cutting bush is a dangerous job. People think that lumberjacks have it dangerous in Canada. A surveyor who's just got a chainsaw cutting a line out, and the only person that you have for help is your assistant. That's a scary job, man. Trees come up and they clip you in the head and throw you in the bush. I mean, that shit happens, you know. And we would run out in the bush on quads and Argos and Skidoos. I mean, it took us 4 hours most days one way to get to the job, and we still had to perform a minimum of 8 to 10 hours worth of field work. I mean, we would work 18 hours a day. The pay would start the second you left the hotel room, and the pay would stop the second you entered the hotel room door. You know, That's why we were making so much money. Quads were $500 a day. That's what I got to wake up. I mean, I really felt like I had arrived with that job. And I could drink and use, and things were great. You know, they really were. They were great. I'm not going to say that drinking and using was bad, because I had some great fucking times drinking and using. You know? Great times. Now, in that career, my Alberta mom saying that to me, it was all too much. And I remember this distinct weekend, my Alberta mom took off with her kids to out kind of by Jasper, Alberta. And I stayed behind. I was supposed to go with them, but I stayed behind because I had some good-looking girlfriend that I thought was, you know, just fantastic. The apple of my eye, so to say, at that time. And so she came over and, you know, we basically fucked our brains out for the weekend. And within I think within a month, we were living with each other. And she would come and visit me. I was working with another person in the same firm. And this guy was a family guy. This was a really good experience with this guy because he kind of reminded me of that guy, Jim. You know, he had 3 kids and his wife, and he had a great big house, and he had really made his money work for him when he was in, you know, when he first started off in the oil field. I mean, I was sitting there pissing it all away. I really was. I had no aspirations to save any of that money. It was just fucking woohoo, ready to go and rock and roll. Let's get drunk. I worked my ass off. That's what it was. That was the whole period time. So we're looking at almost 3-4 years here where that was the perpetuation. And in that time, I mean, I had taken some Alberta Land Surveyors courses, and I was getting my calculus up and going because that's what you had to do in order to be a crew chief. So I was kind of putting things together, but these guys were paying me to do it. That's how it worked. And so anyways, what ended up happening was I worked for this company for quite some time, and I was dating this girl. We ended up moving in together, and that was a good thing. And then all of a sudden I got laid off. And the reason why I got laid off from this amazing firm was because my alcoholism makes me angry in the morning. And when my alcoholism is calling and my addiction is calling, it's just business. I got to get down to it. And fuck you if you're in my way. I will manipulate, connive, and do whatever I have to do in order to get there. No longer could my job stop me from drinking and using. I mean, fuck, I had to drink and use now while I was in the oil field, while I was on the quad. That's fucking drinking and driving. That's what I was doing. And when I was working with this other guy who reminded me of Jim, I calmed down quite a bit. But he understood me. For whatever reason, he understood me. But this new guy that I was working with, he didn't understand me. He just wanted it his way. He was a young asshole, and I didn't feel I needed to respect him at all. You know, I didn't feel like I needed to respect him at all. So lo and behold, I came back to the city, and the firm laid me off. Well, very quickly, because now I had about 2 years experience, 3 years experience almost at this time with that firm, I got a job with another major firm. And this firm sent me all over the place, like internationally sent me all over the place. I mean, if you could, I mean, I was drinking in fucking Saudi Arabia. You know how, like, the bad news, son. That's just bad news. Then I was back in Alberta working for that major firm, still in this relationship, shacked up with this girl. And the asshole drunk that I was, I mean, I just treated her like shit. Admittedly, I treated her like shit. I think at the time, though, she didn't understand why I was treating her like shit, because she couldn't really smell the vodka that was on my breath. And so, as I'm working for that firm, when I started, my jealousies reared its ugly head, and I thought that maybe she was cheating on me, so on and so forth. And so I would make every excuse in the book in order to go home. Eventually, I asked them for a layoff because I lied, saying that my family was in peril. And I came up, I can't remember the exact excuse or the exact lie, but it was complete bullshit. And I'm pretty sure that they knew it as well. You know, I'm pretty sure they knew it as well. So, anyway, I came back to back to the city, laid off. I took some time off, and then fall rolled around, and I'm still with this girl, and I worked for another oil field company. Well, with this oil field company, I broke my back. Long story short, my girlfriend at that time didn't even show up in the hospital. I mean, I was helicoptered back into the city. I had broke my back from a quadding accident. I rolled a quad. I was going up a hill, and this quad rolled on me 200 meters down a hill. Now, truth be told, I was high. 100% I was high. You know, that's why. I mean, I had used the night before, and the next day, I mean, I wasn't intoxicated then, but I was definitely coming down. And so I'm not really on it when I'm coming down, you know? And so from that time on, they ended up getting rid of me the best way they could, in the most unliablest way that they could. That's what they were trying to do, was just get rid of me. So from that time on, I was back in the city, and I really had I had to contemplate if I was going to go back into the bush or what I was going to do. And I'm with this girl, and I was treating her like shit. I really was. I mean, it was nice at times, but I had to have, you know, my half a quarter pound of weed every 2 weeks, and drinking and paying the rent. And you know, I thought I could just grow up. You know, I thought she was going to be the one I was going to marry, and I could just grow up. And I mean, she used drugs just as much as I did. You know, we were two toxic people with each other. But I'm only going to talk about my side of things in this relationship. And my side was not great. You know, it was really not great. So time went on, and I remember getting or seeing an advertisement for a company called Stantec, which is a large engineering firm. I got a job with them. And so when I got a job with them, one of the things that was great was I got to do what I do, and I liked doing what I did, and I got to stay home in my own bed, which all of a sudden I now appreciated. As much as I loved being out on the road, rock and roll, I liked the fact that there was some sort of stability to staying home. That was good to me. So as this was going on, Stantec gave me an opportunity to continue with school, and I continued with school and finished a calculations course with the Alberta Land Surveyors Association. And all of a sudden, I was in the realm of being able to become a crew chief, a party chief. And when that ended up happening in the city, I remember I was working with this guy, Tom. Tom was a great guy. He had some of the best notes in the industry, and he was a fantastic guy, just fantastic. I worked with Tom for quite some time, and by this point, I had been with this company for a while, and it looked like things were going to work out with this company. I remember Tom dropped me off one time after work on a Friday. And he said to me, Justin, if I'm not work on Monday, it's because I killed myself. And he would laugh. I mean, Tom always had this morbid humor about him. I always knew that there was something up with Tom, but I wasn't really quite sure what was going on with Tom. So the weekend passed, and I went to work on Monday, and Tom didn't show up. I didn't think anything of it. I mean, him and I had been working together for quite some time, so you could understand that when you're working with somebody in the confines of a truck and in the ideology of a crew, you guys become more than friends, more than buddies. You know some of the intimate things about each other's lives, but not a whole bunch of like the really, really intimate things. You know how the guy's behaviors are, but you don't know what those behaviors are stemmed from, really. Wednesday rolled around, and the call was made to us that we all had to come in early in the morning and they were going to have a meeting. So a meeting happened, and it was told to us that Tom had committed suicide with crack cocaine. It wasn't an overdose. It was intentional overdose. Now, the weekend that Tom had committed suicide was also the weekend that his other brother committed suicide. Tom basically thought it best of himself to sacrifice himself so that nobody else would have to deal with his addiction any longer. He felt that he was a piece of cancer in his own family, and I understand that feeling today because I have felt that myself. And it's a horrible, horrible feeling. So in that amount of time, I ended up taking a week off, and Stantec ended up giving me a crew afterwards. Life was great after that. I mean, I didn't really deal with the feelings that I had about the death of Tom in an appropriate way. I drank them away down the river and smoked them through my lungs and, thought to myself, what a fucking loser. There I was again judging, So here I was working with this company and running a crew and learned how to do that. And it looked like that a career was ahead of me, and a good career. I mean, I was making really good money. Really good money. And all of a sudden, this girl that I thought loved me with all of her heart decided she was going to leave 3 years into the relationship. In that moment, it felt like my arm had been cut off. As much as she couldn't understand why I was an asshole, I couldn't understand why she was leaving. I couldn't understand why she would abandon me, because again, that word abandonment was there again. However, I was the one who set up that abandonment because of my drinking and using. It was my fault. I mean, what the fuck was she going to do? Hang around with me with a guy who would get so verbally violent I would be in her face and she would think I was going to hit her. That's where I was in life. That's what I was doing. So, in saying that, she had no recourse. She had to leave. I mean, things were escalating, and they were escalating quite rapidly at this time. So when she left, what I ended up doing was I ended up just drinking my life away. I couldn't show up to my career job. I couldn't maintain life anymore. So I ended up going to a doctor, crying my brains out, saying, look, Ed, my wife, my common law wife has just left me. I think I'm going to kill myself. I need time off. I need a mental break. So he wrote me a letter, and I went back to this wonderful, amazing company that I worked for, and I said, I need short-term disability. And they said, okay, okay, here you go. So I took short-term disability, and that really didn't help my addiction issues at all. Instead, what it did was it allowed me to drink all the time, and now I got paid, not EI money, employment insurance money, but I was paid my full salary while not having to show up in the summertime, which is the busiest time for a surveyor, a land surveyor, in the height of construction season. See, the town I lived in Alberta, there's 2 seasons. There's winter and construction. That's what it is in this town, or in that town. And so there I was. I mean, some of the drunkenness that had happened was I woke up in Vancouver. Didn't know how I got there. I woke up underneath the tree of the apartment building that I kind of lived at. Didn't know how I got there. I once woke up on a train on my way to Winnipeg. Didn't know how that had happened. My blackouts were like, it was like sleepwalking. Sleepwalking through life is where I was at. And then finally, that dried up. I wasn't on short-term disability anymore, and the psychiatrist from my company basically said, you're fit to go back to work. You need to go back to work. Well, I wasn't really ready to go back to work because I wasn't done drinking. I realized that drinking all day long is way fucking better than anything I was doing when I was at work. I mean, work wasn't going to allow me to drink and use the way that I was drinking now. See, this is where my disease is progressive. I could stop before times in the confines of the times that I was working, but no longer could I do that. That couldn't happen for me anymore. It just wasn't working. It just wasn't working for me anymore. So I went back to work and I self-sabotaged. Basically, I was asked to leave that company. I was put in a corner to where I had to give my resignation. And that's what happened. I ended up getting another job in the oil field after that company, but I pissed that away too. Plus, it was about 2008 at this time, so the oil field was drying up. We were going into a recession in Alberta. And so I had come to realize that Alberta is the problem, not Justin. You know, I only drink because of all the assholes, all those redneck motherfucking assholes in Alberta. That's why I drink. It's all because of them. It's not because of me. I don't have a problem. Look, I never had a problem because I could always drink and maintain life. I mean, if these assholes just weren't at work, I wouldn't fucking drink. That was my thinking at that time. That's where I was at. So I started looking for work back in Ontario, thinking that a geographical change would happen. And this was in the fall of 2008 that this was happening. I had finally made a decision that I was going to go home for Christmas. Hadn't been home in a long time. I hadn't seen my mom. I had not seen my mom since she left me in Alberta. Now, this oil field company gave me one job that basically paid the entire trip. While I was waiting to go home, I met a guy who was truly a gangster. I mean, this guy was truly a gangster. We would smoke hash and do coke and drink and all this stuff. And I mean, this company, they gave me a great opportunity because there was really no work, and they gave me enough money in order to go home. You know, they gave me a job that was worth $12,000. And that could definitely sustain me while I was going home, for when I went home. So first thing I did when I got that paycheck was I bought my plane tickets. Thank God. Thank God. Because if it hadn't been for that, I would have never made it. And I think I sent some money to my mom for when I went there. I also got my marijuana over there in a way that I'm not going to disclose here. Because see, here in Canada, we don't have statute of limitations. So I really try to stay away from some of the crime and some of the things that, some of the criminal things that people have done around me through my active addiction. So now, as I'm waiting basically to go home back to Northern Ontario and see my mom went through a bunch of trials and tribulations. I mean, her and my brother's father broke up many, many times in this 3 or 4 year period. You know, my mom knew that there was some drinking going on. She knew that I was definitely, you know, womanizing, and she also knew that I was probably a blackout drunk. The one thing that I can say about my mom, or what I did with my mom, is my mom never met any of the women in my life. And I was a major womanizer when I was drinking and using. I mean, sex was just a byproduct of drinking and using. You know, I abused my sex as much as I abused drugs and alcohol. That's just what I did. And so, like I said, I had met this gangster, and I mean, we got along great. We were both of the same mentality. And there were times when we didn't sleep for weeks and weeks and weeks, you know. Um, Finally, my Alberta mom's daughter came and picked me up on November 25th, 2008. I jumped on a plane and I went back to Northern Ontario to visit my mom. And that's where I'm going to leave this podcast now. I hope that this gives you a little bit of insight of what wreckage looks like, the feelings behind wreckage, the things that addicts are capable of, and the delusion that we live in. Because the delusion is what instigates a lot of the denial, and the denial instigates the fact that I don't have a problem. Do you know that? I don't have a problem. You may call me an alcoholic. The doctor calls me an alcoholic, but I don't have a problem. And the only way for me to figure out that I do have a problem is I need another bag and I need another bottle. That's what it was at that time. I mean, rock bottom hadn't happened yet for me. That's what was happening. That's where I was at. And here I was, truly believing that Alberta's the problem. These fucking rednecks, if they just weren't at my job, shit, I would be fine. I wouldn't have to drink at work. Could you imagine not having to drink at work? Shit, life would be fucking great, wouldn't it? I still hadn't came to realize that I was perpetuating the behaviors that my brother's father had done and my own father had done. I couldn't recognize it in that moment. Why? Because I was delusional. I was living in a world of insidious insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. Those results never came. It was always the same answer to the formula that was presented. Justin drinks. Justin's a fall down. Justin loses his job. That's where I was at that moment. I hope that if you are somebody who's helping an alcoholic, you know, the biggest disservice that anybody did for me was they kept enabling me. And how they enabled me was nobody was willing to say, Justin, I love you so much that I'm not going to love you until you hit the grave. You need to come to me when you're ready to change. I mean, my Alberta mom kind of did that with the education thing, but she ended up having to write me off too, because she came home one time and there I am, passed out on her stairs. You know, plus she could see through my bullshit. She could see that I was lying all the time. You know, my Alberta mom was not like my biological mom who loved me unconditionally. You know, that's not what she loved. That's not what she was capable of for me. She was capable of doing that with her own children, but not for me. Now this woman who I thought was going to marry me has left. And I really felt in that moment I was free. I was left to my own devices. As codependent as I was, I never thought that I would get past this relationship that I was in with that woman. I never thought I would get past it. But, you know, of course, as the saying goes, get under somebody to get over somebody else. Spoke truth to me. And that's what I did. 100% that's what I did. So, until the next podcast, I hope you might be able to identify with some of these emotions. I hope you enjoyed your time here today. And, until next time, thanks. Talk to you again. Bye for now.